Good evening. How are we all doing? I am Chris, and I'm back with another James Bond review. This is our penultimate one. We've only got one more next week, and we're all done. All 25 are out there. So, yeah, it's going to be weird saying goodbye to the Bond franchise again, but we still have plenty to talk about, especially in tonight's review, and indeed next week. We've already got Craig in. This is awesome. This is awesome. We've got Carl in as well. This is great. Yes, we have much to discuss. Craig says the dead are alive, and actually your thumbnail right there being I'm thinking that's Star Wars, isn't it? Is that Kylo Ren? Watching this again today, I completely forgot that it opened with the dead are alive, and it just reminded me of Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker. The dead was it the dead speak? Both are terrible opening lines, but we'll get to it. We'll get to it. We haven't got to it just yet. Craig says, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this one after a rewatch this evening. Personally, I've always liked it. Mid-tier Craig era for me. That's actually a really good point. I'm going to open it up to everyone else as well. Let me know your thoughts on, have I changed it on here? I have changed it on here. Let me bring that up on screen. I thought it still said Skyfall from the weekend, but yeah, let me know your thoughts on Spectre. I'm very interested to hear people's opinions on this one. And if indeed people's opinions on it have changed since the release of No Time to Die, if that's kind of enhanced the viewing experience a little bit and certain characters' backstories. There is one scene in particular within this film that has that's definitely been elevated for me, having seen the opening scene from No Time to Die, but we'll get into that as we get into the review. Craig says, only spotted the Hildebrand rarity short story Easter egg tonight for the first time. I'm not too caught up on that one. I know that the whole Oberhauser thing was a character name that was used. I think it's alluded to in one of the books, one of the short stories. I think it might be Octopussy or something like that. That there was a guy called Hans Oberhauser, I think it is, who was the father figure to Bond, who helped raise him for a bit, which Sam Mendes completely went off on the deep end with, and delved into possible Austin Powers Goldmember territory. But again, as I say, there's much to discuss tonight. There really is. And of course, long-time viewer, good to see you again, mate. We've got Carl. Congratulations on 110 subs already. I know, I'm just as shocked as you are, but very grateful. Very grateful to everyone who's hit the subscribe button. And if you haven't done so already, I do encourage you to do so. I still need to try and think of something to do for a 100 subscriber special, but I guess now I should call it 110 subscriber special. But yeah, if you're into movies and if you're into TV shows, please do consider hitting the subscribe button. I'm definitely jumping on live streams a lot more now. Indeed, the schedule for the rest of the week, I'm going to be going live tomorrow for episode 4 of Star Wars Andor. I was kind of on the fence about the first 3, but I think genuinely I've tended more towards the positive side. So I'm going to be going live tomorrow night at 11 p.m. British Standard Time. And indeed, later in the week, we've got another episode of Rings of Power. We're up to episode 6 now. Those are always good fun to talk about. The episodes are terrible, but it's good fun to talk about. So once again, that's going to be later on this week, 30th September at 11 p.m. British Standard Time. Craig says Hildebrand was the safe house met Bonded. Oh, okay, that's cool. And you know what? After watching this again tonight, I do notice more ingredients of like those classic Bond isms, if you want to call it that, or references at least of iconography to previous Bond films, which, you know, I probably may have noticed them before, in all honesty, but definitely, you know, watching this with a fresh look tonight definitely rekindled some of those. Although it contains those, it doesn't quite stick the landing for me. I'm going to talk about my history with this film. So this was the second Bond film I ever saw in the cinema. I started watching them in the cinema from Skyfall, as I mentioned last week. And then I just followed suit with this one. So the Craig ones were the first few Bond films that, you know, I powered through with. No, tell a lie, actually. Before Spectre was coming out, when I used to be on a channel that shall remain nameless, for you long-term viewers, you know exactly which one I'm talking about. Before Spectre was coming out, we were actually planning to review all of the Bond films in a very similar way that I've done all these ones. But I think we were going to try and shoot for reviewing 3 a week, which is a lot of Bond films to get watched in a very short amount of time, let alone absorb them and actually get some kind of review across. So I think I was powering through them, and I think I got to For Your Eyes Only, and we just realized that we wouldn't hit the deadline for the video that we needed to before Spectre came out. So I kind of gave that up as a bad job. Reviewed Spectre, watched Spectre, and I really didn't care for it. I thought it was boring, monotonous, low energy, very desaturated, felt very Christopher Nolan-esque, which I would actually say is very true, certainly of, well, I guess you could say all of the Daniel Craig era, really, but especially Skyfall through to No Time to Die, definitely. There's a lot of, and I have made, in fact, a lot of Dark Knight trilogy comparisons to those films. And there's some more comparisons to it tonight, I'm sure. And then I watched it again on home video. So that's 2 times I watched it. And then I rewatched it again last year when I did my retrospective last year before No Time to Die came out. Now I have No Time to Die to bolster this film. And I mean, I guess it's made me enjoy this film a lot more. Here's the thing. If I'm going to compare this to No Time to Die, which seems really weird too, but because we've got like a complete saga now, you know, a beginning, middle, and end of this complete Daniel Craig era, I think it's worth comparing it to. I think that this is the most arduous of the Daniel Craig films to get through. Personally, for me, out of his era, I do think that you've got Spectre, you know, they got the rights back to Spectre after years and years and years of not being able to use anything from that. You know, they couldn't use the Blofeld character. They couldn't even use the name Spectre since Diamonds Are Forever, I believe, was the last one that actually could use it. And even then it was, oh no, because you did, For Your Eyes Only, you do kind of get the Blofeld character at the beginning, don't you? Although they can't say it is, but it is. So I guess an argument could be made that technically it was from that, but legally, since Diamonds Are Forever. And you know, you've got all the elements in there, and I just think that there was so much potential with this film, and especially after the, you know, the massive critical acclaim of Skyfall, you know, everyone was looking forward to this one, and I just really don't think it did much with that potential. I think in terms of casting, I don't think you could wish for a better person than Christoph Waltz. Certainly around that time as well, you know, you'd had Inglourious Bastards and Django Unchained, and his popularity was massive at the time. Dare I say he was kind of typecast a little bit in a lot of villain roles around that point. But I think in terms of casting someone for Blofeld, I think he's a fantastic actor, and I think with better material, he could have been truly memorable. As it is, I just really don't feel like they did much with his character, which is a bit of a shame. I think the most villainous thing he does in the entire film is wearing really, really short chino trousers with sandals and no socks. But beyond that, you know, he doesn't really do much, and I'll dive into his character a little bit later. You've got other classic Bond ingredients in there. You've got Dave Bautista as this silent henchman kind of character that's, you know, harkening back to the likes of Oddjob or Jaws. You know, you've got Sam Mendes back as director, and to be honest, I think that's ultimately where the film falters. Sam Mendes, I get the impression, and I did a little bit of reading on this before, that he was a one Bond film director. He had his vision for what he wanted to do with a Bond film. It was tightly written. It was executed perfectly. An argument could be made that the tone was a little bit dour and it didn't really follow on from a lot of elements that were set up from Quantum of Solace. In fact, it didn't really follow up with any of the Quantum or any of the, as it's retconned in this film, Spectre stuff. So that was kind of awkward that they were teasing that at the end of Quantum to follow that up into the next film. And they didn't really do anything with that in Skyfall. But that being said, Skyfall was just, you could tell it was a passion project. It was a very, very clear auteur director's vision that was executed perfectly. Whether or not you enjoy that film, I don't think it's massively entertaining as a Bond film, but I think it's very well made. I think the cinematography is beautiful. It's well shot, and you know, it is very tightly written. Bit of convenient writing in there at points, but on the whole, it's a solid Bond film. But I think with Mendes, I think you can't capture lightning in a bottle twice. I really don't. And I get the impression that maybe he was brought onto this out of obligation. I know that there was originally another director who was vying for the position of directing this film, and I think he dropped out. And then I get the impression that either with a lot of money or a bit of coaxing, Sam Mendes decided to come back to do it. But I don't necessarily think that his heart was in this one. That being said, the screenplay was written by exactly the same people as Skyfall. And yet I think there's a lot of problems with the screenplay in this one. Indeed, following on from elements that were set up from Skyfall. There is the introduction of a new screenwriter in this one compared to Skyfall, though, which is Jez Butterworth. And from what I've read, Jez Butterworth was actually kind of like an old school Bond fan, and he said that any moments where there's just long talking scenes of Bond, he just like put a line through them and was like, no, Bond needs to shoot someone in this scene. And I actually kind of wish that Jez may have written the whole script, maybe, because there's certainly a lot of long, arduous talking scenes in this that aren't really particularly interesting to me. I don't want to be completely down on this film, and hopefully by the end of this discussion, I'll actually talk about things that I enjoy with the film. That's might be a tough act, actually, to try and do that, but I'm going to try at least. But yeah, I just get the impression that I think having Sam Mendes back as director a second time round was probably not the right move for this. I think with Mendes directing, if he had have just done Skyfall, I think that would have been like a really unique, good 50th anniversary Bond film, auteur director's Bond film. But then this one, I think you needed a bit of shot of, like a shot of adrenaline in there. This was your chance to do something, fun with it, and let's get the adventure moving. And it just seems like it's even more so than Skyfall. It's just steeped in being very miserable and down. The color palette for this film is just, it may as well be in black and white. It may as well just be at nighttime the whole time. It's just really, I mean, the opening scene, for example, in Mexico City, fantastically staged sequence. And actually, it's my favorite scene of the whole film. I think it's my favorite action scene of the whole film is the intro. You've got the one take as well, which Sam Mendes would completely double down on when he comes to 1917. And I actually think it was some people can view, single shots. And I know it probably wasn't done in one take. There's moments where, and I think there's a video on YouTube that breaks it down of all the individual edits of that opening sequence, but it's blended well and it's done stylistically to look like it was all done in one take. I think that can be effective sometimes. I think it can be good to establish a sense of geography and place and space within the scene. Tarantino uses that to great effect in the first Kill Bill film, which actually, coincidentally, is getting a rescreening at my local cinema this Thursday. So I can't wait. They've played Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown, this week's Kill Bill 1 and next week's Kill Bill 2. So, the scenes in the club at the end, right before the fight scene where the camera's moving between places and you get a sense of where everything is. And Tarantino's not the only director that does it. It's been done by loads of people. But I think sometimes those one takes can be a little bit gimmicky and they can just be done for the sake of, oh, look how much effort, how artsy this is. And I don't know where I fall on it with this one. I don't think there was any need to do it in one take. But I guess it does make it more unique in the fact that if you're looking at the opening sequences as a whole in the franchise, or if you want to give it a bit more identity, you go straight to Spectre and go, that was the opening scene. Dia de Muertos is a very striking setting to have it in. We've seen parades and stuff before in the Bond franchise. We've seen Mardi Gras and other assorted things like that. But Dia de Muertos is a really cool visual look to it. The fact that it's done in one take. But then again, go into the color palette. Because it's in Mexico, it means we've got to slap this like horrible urine yellow filter over everything. And I think actually, again, going back to YouTube, there's someone that has color corrected at least this opening scene just for a sake of comparison and brought the natural tones into it more. And the colors are vibrant and it's bright and everything's all kind of defaulted to what it probably was on set, where the whites look like proper whites and not just this horrible yellow stain that's just all over it. Really, and a lot of films do that, to be fair. I think Sicario does that as well, if I remember rightly. It's just, we're setting something in Mexico, so we instantly have to have this yellow filter over the camera. It's really weird. But as an opening sequence, I think it's fine. If I am going to split hairs now, and this kind of goes into the Daniel Craig stuff now as well, and I'm actually I think you mentioned this earlier, if I remember rightly. Let me see. You talk about. I thought you left a comment earlier, sorry, about the whole couch sequence and everything at the beginning. And there are moments in this film where it really tries to have it both ways. And I mentioned that last week in Skyfall. It's probably the Sam Mendes and the tonal thing, in that it's like, pick a tone, pick a consistent tone. If you want your film to be really dark and miserable and humorless, which this film for the most part is, then that's fine. But stick to that. When you try and crowbar in some humor into it, sometimes it can come across as really disingenuous. And in the case of this movie, in my opinion, it just comes across as really just tonal whiplash. And to some extent, No Time to Die has that too, but I think I think No Time to Die is slightly more consistent with its tone, perhaps. Maybe not in the grand scheme of all the other Daniel Craig Bond films, but certainly as a film in itself, I think it's a little bit more consistent, perhaps. But this one, you've got scenes where there's a very intense action sequence at the beginning, and the flooring collapses on the building, and then convenient writing, Bond just lands on a sofa. And you could go, oh, well, he's Bond, he gets out of every situation. But I'm just watching that going, that's really lazy writing, just having that conveniently placed sofa there. And if you are going to make a point of it and have it be this kind of cheesy, Bond gets out of every situation, even if you put a conveniently placed couch there, have him do a one-liner, but have that be the consistent tone. Have it be a little bit more comedic. Have it be a little bit more silly. And we know that Daniel Craig can do that, because No Time to Die, really randomly, at least up until the ending, he seems a lot more wisecracking. It seems like there's a lot more one-liners in there. He seems like he's a lot more upbeat in the role of James Bond. And I remember saying at the time when I reviewed it, it's going to be interesting to see if I have the same opinions on it next week when I give it a rewatch. I kind of wish that's how Daniel Craig would have played Bond across his whole Bond era, because I actually really liked his performance in No Time to Die. And as of right now, again, this could change next week, I think that Daniel Craig's best performance is in No Time to Die, where he can just relax into it a bit more and he can have a bit more fun. And, that's what it's all about. That's what Bond should be about. But he's not that Bond in this. He's very serious. But then he lands on the couch, and I thought you could probably drop a one-liner in there if you wanted to, if you wanted more of those classic Bondisms. I'm trying to think of other things. Oh, there's the car chase throughout Rome. And at this point, the film's just really, really miserable. And there's not much humor. And, the color palette doesn't help as well. Just visually, it kind of matches the tone of the film. And then there's a bit where he's turning on the radio and, New York, New York starts playing. And he goes like, oh, come on. And it took me out of the film. I was like, oh my God, humor. I mean, I don't think it's a particularly good joke, but I think it's just the placement of it in the whole rest of the film. And there's a few moments like that throughout the film that just really don't work for me. And I almost think that the film would be better if you just extracted all of the humor out of it, just to make it more consistent. Which is actually really funny. I'm going to be jumping all over the place with this review, but if we're talking about the intro and the music, for example, it's kind of funny because originally Radiohead, of course, if you're a Bond fan, you probably know this already, but Radiohead was originally chosen to produce a song for the film. I think they submitted a song that they'd already written in the 90s called Man of War, which I don't think would have worked anyway, even if they had have gone with that. But the studio probably quite rightly refused to take that one on, saying that we want an original song that's written by you. It's funny, though, because Madonna had written a demo. So Die Another Day, that was a dance demo that she'd released that was meant to be part of her own album, which she didn't release, but somehow they allowed that. But with this one, Radiohead had already written a song, which was an unreleased song, but they wouldn't allow that one. So I don't know, double standards. I don't know whether the landscape had changed now with the Bond music, for example, and they were really going for that Academy Award for Best Original Song each time, probably again following the success of Skyfall. So they wrote an original song called Spectre, which is very convenient. It's the title of the film. Now, this song, it's grown on me. It has definitely grown on me over the many, many times that I've listened to it. And I don't know whether it's a case of keep listening to something until you eventually like it. But I've still tried to do that with Writings on the Wall with Sam Smith, and I haven't quite managed to do it. So I think Radiohead's song tonally would have fit the film a lot better. But this is where it's really ironic, because it was rejected because apparently it was too melancholy. And I was like, have you seen the final film? Like, the film is incredibly melancholy. So I actually think Spectre would have been the perfect song for it, in all honesty. I don't think it's a great Bond song to listen to on its own, and it definitely wouldn't have hit the heights of You Know My Name from Casino Royale, or even Adele's Skyfall. And I can understand maybe it's got a very unique rhythm to it. I think in terms of its time signature, it isn't a conventional time signature, but it's just the way that the rhythm works and the pulse of it. It feels kind of off kilter and a little bit awkward, and it's sung in falsetto pretty much the entire time. So I think in terms of radio play, it definitely doesn't have that catchy instant hook that maybe Adele's song does, or any of the previous songs do, if they were going for radio play, and that's probably what they were going for, in all honesty. So maybe that filtered into the reason that they didn't go with it. So they chose Sam Smith, who was probably, I mean, I don't know, was Sam Smith more popular than Radiohead at the time? I guess probably in the conventional pop charts he is. And Writings on the Wall was released unto the world, wasn't it? Sam Mendes, for some reason, it's not Sam Mendes, sorry. Sam Smith apparently boasts that he pretty much had the song down and he had a demo almost ready to go and written within half hour. I don't know if he's exaggerating there, but if that's the case, I don't know why you'd gloat over something like that, because surely you'd want to really take your time with it. You're producing a Bond song. Take some time with it. Don't just rush it out in half hour. I mean, I commend the effort. I mean, if this is a song that was written in half hour, it's a damn sight better than a song that I could produce in half hour. That's for damn sure. And I really like the instrumental of this song. I think, when the orchestra kicks in, the scene that really comes to mind, actually, it's right after Dave Bautista's character has been dispatched with on the train. And you've got Madeline and Bond just kind of sitting there recuperating, and she's like, what do we do now? And then you just instantly cut and they start fucking. But the music kicks in there, and it's the instrumental version of Writings on the Wall. And it's beautiful, and the strings are fantastic, and the piano and everything. And then it cuts to outside the train, wide shot, bird's eye view of the train, and you've just kind of got the piano with the chords, and it's really atmospheric. I love the music in that scene. And it almost kind of, I wish we could go back to the days of where we get the main theme to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which they would never do nowadays. With a Bond film, they would have to have a popular singer, they would have to go for radio play, and they would have to go for the Academy Award. But On Her Majesty's Secret Service, I guess you could argue that you've got the Louis Armstrong song, We Have All the Time in the World, and that's the Bond song of the main film. But the main titles is just the John Barry score. And what a great score it is as well. That main theme to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, fantastic. And I almost kind of wish that if they did choose to go with the Sam Smith song, Writings on the Wall, that it was just an instrumental. And I think I would, if you took the singing out of it, I think I'd like it a lot more. On the whole, with the film and visually how it is and tonally, I kind of wish they'd have gone with the Radiohead one. And someone's actually produced an edit again on YouTube where they've put the Radiohead Spectre song over the main titles, and I actually think it works a lot better, specifically with the visuals that are showcased. I'm just going to go to your guys' comments real quickly, because I haven't been bringing them up and I feel really bad. Carl says, I finally bought the James Bond complete Blu-ray collection, was only £25. Dude, that is an absolute steal. That is fantastic. And the thing is as well, if you get the box set with from Dr. No all the way through to No Time to Die, regardless of what they do with the Bond franchise afterwards, and I've really got my fingers crossed that they do something good with it, but they have said that their next one, they're going to completely reinvent the character, which in 2022's media really terrifies me what the potential of that is. But you've basically got Dr. No all the way through to No Time to Die, where Bond dies at the end. So there you go. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's the complete Bond franchise right there, because it's going to be very, very difficult, very weird for them to continue the Bond franchise after he's already died at the end. Craig says Sam Mendes does do a lot of long takes, which I appreciated. Yeah, he does. He does. And this is where I say, is that just his distinctive style? Is there a purpose to him doing those scenes in long takes, or does it just come across as a little bit of artsy wankery? I actually don't have a problem with the long takes in this film. I think, as I mentioned, it gives it that unique quality, and I think, to take in the beauty of Dia des Muertos and the staging and the costumes and everything, and as I mentioned, that sense of space from the hotel room, the apartment room that he's in with the woman, and then he walks out across the rooftops to that other building. I think it's really effective. The problem I have is mostly from the script and the tone, because there is a lot of artsy wankery in this film, especially when it comes to the screenplay, and it feels like the film thinks it's being more intelligent than it actually is. And I'll get onto some specific scenes later to give you an example. Hey, but this is why I love it, right? So Craig says, I bet you hate the song. I know this comment was before I started going on about the music. So you were correct. Yes, I do. But I'm fine with you loving it. If you love, I'd say it's probably grown on me more, not completely to the point where I love the song, but certainly from that night when I first heard it. I remember staying up listening to that song and thinking, good Christ, what's this? I think the falsetto just kind of gets to me after a while, and it just becomes really repetitive. So I think maybe with another singer, I'd enjoy the song a bit more, but I think Radiohead's song is much more complex. Musically, it's definitely a lot more complex, that's for sure. And I think lyrically, if you can actually make out the lyrics to the Radiohead song, because it's in very high falsetto as well, both of them are, I think the lyrics match the film a lot more and the emotions of Bond in that moment, and I think it fits the film a lot more. I think Writings on the Wall just comes across as a bit of a generic song. We need a film with a generic Bond sound. That being said, I do think with the orchestral movement behind it and the actual the orchestra behind Writings on the Wall does fit that more classic Bond theme, I would say, in terms of that broad sweeping string section that kicks in. But I'm just not keen on the lyrics. I think is very weak, and the singing, certainly I'm not a massive Sam Smith fan. Craig says, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you think of using the worst Bond girl. It's like the Living Daylights again, bland actress. So I had exactly the same thoughts on the Living Daylights the first time I watched it last year. She didn't really do anything for me, but having watched it again this year, on the big screen and in the lead up to this, I actually appreciated her a lot more, and I actually found her kind of sweet. But yeah, Madeline Swan does absolutely nothing for me across two films. And this is the thing, right? So when I was reviewing this film, it was just, you had to take the film on its own right. And there's many Bond girls loads of the Bond girls just feature in one film. So there's really no excuse even for one Bond film. But now she's got two Bond films under her belt, and I feel exactly the same way about her and just find her totally bland and just no character. And the character that there is there, I just don't care. There's no chemistry, and that's across two Bond films now. So she's had two when most Bond girls only have one, so there's really no excuse. That's actually probably a good segue to talk about Madeline Swan herself. So I'll start with a positive, and this is a positive that's been enhanced by No Time to Die for me, because I was actually kind of watching this film to see if anything contradicted No Time to Die. And I guess you could argue that when she's looking at her childhood photos, the actress they have who plays the young Madeline Swan at the beginning of No Time to Die visually isn't the same ones as in the pictures. So if you're really going to split hairs, but that's just a really small nitpick to me. But I was watching it specifically to think, are they going to slip up somewhere? Because clearly these were made on a film by film basis. And I don't believe they had like a grand master plan to get to the ending and knew where it was all going to unfold. I think they definitely made it up as they went along. Case in point, the whole Silver debacle in this film, tying him into Spectre, which is just wildly out of character. But again, I'll get onto that later when I talk about Blofeld some more and the organization of Spectre. And there's not really many bits that do contradict. There's a bit when she's first talking to Bond and he talks about, my parents. She says something about like, who are your parents, or do you have parents? And he's like, no, they both died. And she just kind of moves on straight away from that. And I thought, like, surely she'd have some kind of reaction to that because her mother was shot, according to No Time to Die. And she never really had a reaction. And I thought, well, that's probably because they never had that backstory written for the character. But then that was completely, thrown to the wayside when later on in the film, which is actually one of my favorite scenes in the film, when they break through that wall and they find all, she finds the old childhood photographs of herself, and Bond finds the interrogation tape of Vesper. I think it's a really good character moment. It's all done without dialogue. And the music's really nice in that scene as well. It's actually one of my favorite pieces of music by Thomas Newman in the film. I'm not too keen on the soundtrack as a whole, and a lot of it does feel like it's just repurposed music from Skyfall. It does sound like a classic Thomas Newman score, for better or worse. But that music there, I think it plays as well in the very outro of the film. Not the final scene of the film where Bond speeds away to the James Bond theme, but the bit where he doesn't shoot Blofeld on the bridge, and you've got that like nice kind of eerie, melancholy piano music that kicks in. I actually really like that. So I like that scene where they're in that room, and she mentions there about that someone, when she was a child, someone came to kill her father, but killed the mother, and she found the gun in the bleach cabinet and everything like that. And I thought, oh, okay, that, they did that right in No Time to Die. So didn't have any problems with that. And that was kind of a nice moment where I was like, oh, okay, that's good attention to detail at least. But it doesn't really change my opinions on Madeline Swan's character. And the thing is that I don't blame the actress. I think that Léa Seydoux is a good actress. And, when they needed to turn up the emotion, or whether she needs to get upset or panicked or scared or whatever, I think she can play it very well. I think it's the script. And I think it's genuinely just a lack of chemistry with Daniel Craig, because that's something that goes between both of the films that I've always had a problem with. It feels more like a father-daughter relationship than it does an actual loving relationship. And this is the woman that, in No Time to Die, this is his new Vesper. This is his baby mama. This is the one he wants to settle down with. And there's just, Daniel Craig had so much chemistry with Eva Green in Casino Royale. And the two are fantastic together. All of their dialogue scenes, the banter back and forth, it feels very genuine. There's a lot of sexual tension there between the two of them, and it feels real. It feels real between the two of those actors. But you just get none of that with this. And I don't know whether it's just Daniel Craig. I think this was the film where you really got that sense that Daniel Craig had fatigue with the character. I don't know whether you could make that argument maybe with Skyfall, or if that's more the tone of the film itself seeping into the Bond character. But from what I read about him, Daniel Craig was still really passionate about Bond, probably the 50th anniversary and the whole Olympics thing as well. He was probably still invested in the character. But I get the impression with this one, he was kind of tired with it. And I don't know whether it was because the film itself had a very turbulent production, and around the time as well, there was the whole Sony film leak as well with the emails, and Sony were expressing their dissatisfaction with the film and the production of the film. I think it was going over budget. I think the budget for this film is something like between 245 and 300 mil. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of fucking money. I think that's probably one of the most... I don't know if it's the Bond film with the highest budget, but it certainly must be up there in terms of the top three. So I don't know whether it was just the fact that he was done. There was a lot of years. There were 3 years between Skyfall and this one. So I honestly don't know. But I get the impression that he was kind of done with the character. I don't know whether it was in the lead up to this. I don't know whether it was in between Skyfall and this film, or after Spectre before No Time to Die, where there was that classic quote of Daniel Craig saying something like, "I'd rather slit my own wrist than play Bond again." And I can't remember if it was before this one and they paid him a lot of money to bring him back for this, or if it was after this film and they paid him a lot of money to bring him back for No Time to Die. I can't remember, but I distinctly remember him saying that. And again, the tone of the film probably doesn't help as well, that attitude towards it. But yeah, there's just no chemistry between the Bond and the Bond girl in this one. Well, there is chemistry with another Bond girl in the film, actually, Monica Bellucci, who was originally going to play Elliot Carver's wife in Tomorrow Never Dies, but was passed up for Terry Hatcher. They finally cast her in this, and they were making a big deal. Oh, the actress was 50. She's the oldest Bond girl they've ever had. But I actually think the chemistry with her and Bond in that very, very quick scene, it almost feels like a pointless scene, to be honest. It's a shame because I think she's really good as the character, and I kind of wish they'd have just made her the main Bond girl throughout the whole film. It's very weird. It's like there's two other Bond girls between this film and No Time to Die that I think had way more chemistry with Daniel Craig, and I wish they'd have been the main Bond girl. You had Monica Bellucci in this film, and you have Ana de Armas in the next film, and both of them are in the film for about 10 minutes, if that, and then they're out of the film, and it's just a real shame. And it's a shame that Monica Bellucci was passed up for so long for the Bond franchise, and then finally got a part in it, and this was the part. It just feels like such a nothing part, and it doesn't feel like they do enough with her character, really. And I think there was a lot of potential there as well, that the fact that she was kind of preyed upon, she had people come into her house to try and kill her, and Bond had to try and protect her. I think, there was that protective instinct there. Great sexual chemistry between the two. And I think age-wise, they were probably a lot closer in age than certainly Daniel Craig and Lea Seydoux are. As I said, it comes across as a father-daughter relationship. Now, I know that in previous Bond films, you could argue that there has been massive age gaps between, Bond and the Bond girl. Probably the worst offender of this, I would say, is either in For Your Eyes Only. But BB, was it BB? Was that the name of her? The figure skater. She was never really a Bond girl in a way, and Bond never really had any romantic thing. He wasn't interested about her. Although she throws advances at him, he wasn't interested. But definitely when you get to A View to a Kill, between Roger Moore and the character of Stacey, yeah, that was kind of awkward, I suppose. But Roger Moore was awesome. I didn't care. Which I suppose is complete hypocrisy when you get to this film, right? But and then in the bit where Bond's getting tortured as well, that's a weird scene as well. The whole torture scene, I'll get onto it with Blofeld. It just doesn't. That scene just comes out of nowhere for me and just doesn't fit with the rest of the film. It's just really ridiculous. And then she runs up to him and she's like, "I love you." I'm like, you barely know each other. There's been no. It doesn't come across on screen. It feels really disingenuous, and it feels like they're telling the audience how these characters should feel rather than me actually getting that impression that they're in love with each other. It was a kind of a whirlwind romance as well with Bond and Vesper in the first film, but that was kind of the point. He was head over heels. He was, wearing his heart on his sleeve and everything. And by the end of that film, it taught him that he can't do that he has to be emotionally detached and he can't always wear his heart on his sleeve, which was, and then I guess, I was going to say Requiem then. Quantum of Solace is him just going, I need to put that behind me and move on. It felt like a very similar character arc, in all honesty, in Quantum of Solace to Casino Royale. By Skyfall, you can make the argument that he's just completely detached. And there's no Bond girl in that one, really, for him to get attached to. And then back in this one, she's fallen in love with him. And in the next film, he's settling down with her and starting a family. So it's very weird. But I agree with you there that I don't know if it's a case that she's a bland actress, but I think it's probably just the material she has to work with, the tone of the film, and just the lack of chemistry between those two actors. And that's not to take anything away as Daniel Craig as an actor or Lea Seydoux as an actor, but sometimes you just put actors together and you just don't get that across on screen, and I think that's a case with this one. Maybe if they'd have done it as like a father-daughter relationship and not had anything romantic in there between the two of them, that would have been better, certainly for this film. But I think continuing Madeleine Swann into a second film was a mistake. I would much prefer just another Bond girl for the last film. I don't see what... It's just that to try and keep everything contained, wasn't it? But I don't think Madeleine Swann was interesting enough to really justify two films. And if they were going to build on her character in the second film, which I guess to a point they do with the flashbacks and stuff, she still wasn't interesting. Even when you throw a kid into the dynamic, the chemistry there just wasn't there between the two of them. Craig says, the problem I have with the Living Daylights, this is going back to Living Daylights now, the Bond girl from that, is that she was meant to be in love with the villain and fell into Bond's arms and then did the dirty on him. I don't know. I don't see why. You get the impression that she loved the villain because he was... in many ways, he was her patron, wasn't he? He was buying her expensive instruments. He was kind of took an interest in her life and her career. And, that's probably why she helped her fall in love with him, I guess. that he was just doing everything for her and promised to the world and everything. But I don't know. I think I genuinely think that the romance between her and Timothy Dalton in that is one of the most romantic ones. Timothy Dalton's easily one of the most romantic Bonds for me. He's a harder edged Bond. He's a man on the edge, but I also think that in those romance scenes, he does feel very genuine. And you could imagine him settling down with, her from The Living Daylights, and especially Pam Bouvier as well. License to Kill. I guess I'm biased. I've always said License to Kill is my favorite one. And watching Spectre again tonight, and just it was tough to get through this one. It wasn't holding my attention, and I was really bored, and I was feeling the runtime. There's actually a line in the film where he's referring to the watch. I think it's in the torture scene, and he says, "Time flies." I thought it really doesn't when I'm watching Spectre. I feel every second of this film. But yeah, I think like Pam Bouvier and stuff. Like I love License to Kill. Like I just love that film so much. And watching this one tonight, I just thought, God, I wish I was watching that film again. I'm a man obsessed with that film. I swear to God, it just gets better and better every single time I see it. I do agree with you there. Q shines in this film. He absolutely does. And I actually forgot a lot of the lines that he has in this film. They definitely try and include him a lot more in this one than he was in Skyfall, which is nice. And we've seen Q, going back to License to Kill, Q kind of came along for the ride, didn't he? So I'm not opposed to that. He's still not a patch on Desmond Llewellyn for me, but he's definitely a lot better in this film. And it's nice to see him get more to do and to get a little bit more of a back and forth with Bond. I like the bit where they repeat this element quite a lot in the Daniel Craig ones. In the first film, he got the implant in his arm, didn't he, to keep track of him, so that MI6 could keep track of him, and he goes like, ow. And I guess it was funny. It gets a chuckle out of the audience. And I think he gets that taken out of his arm, doesn't he, in that film? And then I can't remember if he gets another one in Quantum of Solace. I don't think no, because they're trying to pinpoint his location through his credit cards and purchases, aren't they? So he probably doesn't have one in that one. I can't remember if he gets one in Skyfall. And then he gets another one in this with the nano machines. And they repeat the kind of... He goes like, bloody hell or something, or ow. They repeat the same joke in this one. And then I swear to God, they do the same thing again in No Time to Die. It's like, Christ almighty, they're just juicing this guy up. Like, how many implants is he getting? Do they forget that he got one in the previous movie? This was nanotech or something, I think he mentions in this one, doesn't he? Going back to the whole Q thing, and my favorite scene in the film, other than the opening action sequence, is the final sequence. And I remember watching this at the time, and I think probably hearing that Daniel Craig was getting a bit tired of the character, and especially how many years he'd played the character at this point and how many years it was between films. We all probably thought that Spectre could very well be his last one, and was probably going to be his last one. So I don't know whether the final shot of the film, the final scene of the film, was filmed purely because of that, as maybe like a reshoot or something like that. Because it does feel very conclusive. It almost feels like, well, we have left it open-ended, I guess, with the Blofeld stuff, but we also want to put a cap on Daniel Craig just in case we don't get him back. And I think that's just pure Bond hype. And I remember that's where I felt rejuvenated by the film. And I almost felt like, where was this film? Why couldn't we have got this film? The final scene when he goes to Q and he gets the car, and then you've got the Bond theme that starts creeping up and crescendoing, and it's, it's and it's building and it's building, and you're waiting for that release when it kicks in. Close up, turns the key in the ignition, pan back, he's got the girl to his side, turns to her, smirks to her, turns the ignition, first gear, floors it, Bond theme kicks in full statement, driving through London in the Aston Martin. I'm like, that's how you end a Bond film. Bond hype. Always end your film on Bond hype, if you can. There are exceptions. On Her Majesty's Secret Service wanted to go more dramatic. That's fine. Although when the main Bond theme did kick in the credits in that one, that does kind of take me out of the movie, because it's like, okay, if you're going to end it on a more somber note, then let us stay with that moment. Don't then kick into high gear with the Bond theme. And it was such a cool ending to the film. And I thought, you know what? If that's Daniel Craig's last one, I wasn't keen on some of his films, but that's a way to end it. But then, of course, we have No Time to Die, which, yeah, we'll get onto that next week. We will talk about that next week. But yeah, with No Time to Die coming out, I guess it has made me appreciate Spectre more. I prefer Spectre. It's difficult. they're both bad for different reasons for me. I think Spectre's bad for me just because I don't think the writing's there. I don't think the story's particularly interesting. And just tonally, it's a miserable, arduous experience to get through. For me, I think it really drags, and I don't think it really keeps the momentum there to justify the runtime. I'll get onto the side quest stuff in this film in a minute as well, with the character of C, because that's some of the worst stuff in the film. But then I think that as a film, No Time to Die is definitely a lot more watchable. I think it earns the runtime and it doesn't feel close to 3 hours. I think the action scenes are shot a lot better as well. The color palette, the energy's more in that film, but just what it does to Bond and the conventions of what Bond stands for, it's a complete fucking betrayal. It's a complete betrayal. It's a backhand. It's a middle finger. It's kind of ruined the franchise to me now at this point. And I think it's completely and utterly destroyed what made the Bond character so unique and function as a franchise for all these years. So I kind of resent everything that No Time to Die stands for. And there's a lot of bad writing in No Time to Die as well, which is just laughably terrible. But I think as a film and how it's put together and the pacing of it, it's definitely a lot more interesting to watch and engaging to watch than Spectre. So that's kind of where I fall with both of those films. I don't like either of them, but I have different reasons for not liking them. As a Bond film, this definitely stays true to the core sensibilities of a Bond film in terms of, you know, the villain and the henchman and some of the visual signifiers in a Bond film. And guess what? It ends on Bond hype and doesn't fucking kill Bond in the end. We'll get on to that next week. I can already feel the anger coming out of me because, yeah, I'm going to save it for next week. Let's talk about Blofeld, who's our big villain in this film. I like that we get Blofeld, and it's great that we have the rights back to it. To me, he's like the equivalent of the Joker, isn't he? He's Bond's main villain, and it's nice that we have Blofeld again and can introduce him into there. Played by a fantastic actor. I don't think the writing's there, and I don't think they really have Blofeld doing anything interesting. I very much enjoy his introductory scene. You could make the argument that it does go on for a bit too long and there's a lot of dead air and a lot of silence, but I actually think it builds up the tension quite well. I like how it's lit in that, you know, you've got that long table, which is very reminiscent of the likes of From Russia with Love, which is still my favorite Spectre headquarters, and how that you've got Blofeld kind of up top and his face is obscured. You just get a little bit of him. You've got all that long table and the chairs on either side with all of the Spectre agents and everything recounting on how much money they've made and everything like that, and which countries they've held to ransom and whatnot. I really like that, and just the look of that room's fantastic. They try and recreate it with this. You have the long table, you have all the people sat around it. And when Blofeld initially enters the room, you get that sense of respect that people have for him and the fear that people have for him. And the way that he's lit, he's just in silhouette. I love that. I love how that's shot. So I really enjoy that. I do think the silence does go on a little bit too long, and they could have just, you know, oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I did completely get that wrong. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Sorry. Yeah, Thunderball with a long table. Yeah, my bad. Everything I just said, but Thunderball. That's my favorite. Yeah, that's my favorite Spectre headquarters for sure. And then they just kind of we get the seeds of what is going to be the dismantling of the Blofeld character in this film for me. And I remember watching it for the first time, and it's very tense, and you're kind of in it. You have Batista's character who walks in, who pushes his thumbs into the guy's eyes, and then I guess breaks his neck. The guy's very quiet when he's having someone's thumbs pushed into his eye sockets. He's not screaming. He's not doing anything like that. Maybe they did that because otherwise they'd be going for like a 15 rated certificate or something, but he kind of like spins him around and he's dead. So I'm assuming he breaks his neck in that scene. And then you just end it with Christoph Waltz turning up to Bond in the back. I like that he knows that Bond's there the whole time as well. That's really cool. But then you just ruin that scene with him going, cuckoo. And this is what I mean. This is where I think the script thinks it's way more intelligent than it actually is. Blofeld constantly saying cuckoo isn't intimidating. It isn't intelligent. Like, I get the metaphor. I understand what you're trying to say. With the whole family brother dynamic, which is awful, by the way, and I'll go into that more in just a second. I get the concept of a cuckoo. And they even explain it in the film for the people in the cheap seats who don't understand what a cuckoo is or what a cuckoo does. They explain it in the film. I'm like, I get it. But I just think it's really fucking dumb. And if it wasn't dumb enough, they bring that line back in No Time to Die, by the way, and it just feels like the law of diminishing returns. If you did think that cuckoo was an interesting concept and an interesting line in this film, then surely you must have rolled your eyes when he said it again in No Time to Die, because I was just done. I was just done. The brother dynamic. And this is where it's interesting, because I never grew up with Bond. So I just assumed... but I did grow up with the Austin Powers films. The Austin Powers trilogy, I was on loop when I was younger. I absolutely loved those films, and I still love those films. They're fantastic. I rewatched them again last year. They're still brilliant. And I had even more appreciation for them now that I am a Bond fan and have watched all the Bond films. But clearly not a fan enough to know that I should have been talking about Thunderball and not From Russia with Love. That's on me. But hey, I'm still fairly new to the franchise, you know. I basically became a Bond fan as of last year, which is incredible, but I'm loving it. So I grew up with the Austin Powers films, so I knew at the time that they were a James Bond parody, and I just assumed that most of the stuff that was in those, at least the main tropes, were all stuff that was taken from the Bond films. So when you get to Austin Powers Goldmember, it turns out that Goldmember is Austin Powers' brother. I'm Dougie. I just assumed that was like Bond canon. I always assumed, I guess, and it's weird because I did watch a grand majority of the Bond films before I saw Spectre for the first time. I just assumed that they were maybe in the books siblings or something like that. So when it rolled around into Spectre and it's just like, oh, the two of them are brothers, I thought, oh yeah, well, Austin Powers has parodied this years ago, so I guess they are siblings. But then hearing from a lot of Bond fans, you know, completely up in arms about making Bond and Blofeld brothers, essentially, and saying, you know, this is a complete betrayal. This isn't the case. Like, they're not brothers. Like, what the fuck? And then them saying, oh, I guess Sam Mendes watched Austin Powers Goldmember. And then I thought, holy shit, like, this Goldmember was the first thing to do that. And then this has just completely copied it, which is absolute madness. And again, I get the impression that I don't want to pin all the blame on Sam Mendes because he didn't write the script. He might have had some input with the script or maybe some of the story ideas. And that's why I think, you know, the whole the dead are alive, that seems like a Sam Mendes decision. That was a stylistic decision. That was an auteur's director decision to do that. And it's terrible. And that feels like the artsy wankery stuff in this film that, oh, I have a statement that what was dead is actually alive and our demons are actually still out there and the past is just like just make a fun fucking Bond film, okay? But yeah, that kind of stuff just felt like, oh, I've got a really interesting idea. What a completely different dynamic this will be and how character focused this will be. And it felt like it was just a hopeless attempt to continue the Bond childhood storyline from Skyfall. And I think it worked for Skyfall as a final place to set, you know, your final action scene for that film. I think it works. But he clearly tried to do more with it. And I think he was pouring through all of the Ian Fleming books and he found something about Oberhauser. And then he thought, well, I've got to link it into the villain because I guess the villain's got to have some kind of personal stake with Bond. And then he made them brothers. And I just really think that was the wrong decision to do. Just have Blofeld be ahead of the Spectre organization. That's all you need to do. He's against, well, at the time, Queen and Country. I guess the next Bond film is going to be King and Country now, isn't it? What else was I going to say about this? And again, like this retconning. So in a way, it almost feels like retconning might be the incorrect word for it, but trying to craft the Blofeld character and, you know, anchor it and tie it into Bond's childhood story, which was continued from Skyfall. And in many ways, they've done that with the whole Spectre organization. It's just gone, well, all of the villains, because this is a completely tied in saga now with Bond films, and we're hopelessly trying to keep everything tethered to the narrative and the continuity of the Daniel Craig era. Every villain that he's ever faced has had to be tied into this organization. Because if Spectre just showed up and it had no ties to the previous stuff, would it have had the same impact? And I guess I'm going to pass that question to you guys out there watching. If they didn't reveal in this film that Le Chiffre was part of Spectre and I'm fine with Mr. White being part of Spectre. I think that's fine. But Dominic Green, and which again I'm fine with. But Silver, that was the moment to me where it's like, well, and I mentioned this last week, Silver's just like a mad dog. Silver's the equivalent of the Joker. He's a complete anarchist. He's a guy who lives by his own rules, that has a personal vendetta against them. And you don't get the sense that he was tied into this vast worldwide organization of completely dismantling Queen and Country and causing, terrorism across the world. He didn't care about that shit. He does it as a hobby to make money. He mentions that, oh, if I want to do this, I can do that. If I want to do this, I can. If I want to dismantle a government, I can just do that. But inherently, he's just in it for M. He just wants to get that done, and that's it. I don't get the impression that Silver would be sat around one of these Spectre tables and reporting in on all the stuff that he's doing. He seemed like he was very much a man out for his own self, broke away from MI6 and set up his own. He was just a rogue agent, really, wasn't he? He'd gone off the deep end and was doing his own thing. And I think tying Silver in it, again, it was that hopeless attempt of, well, everything's got to be connected. It was me, Austin. It was me all along. Blofeld just going, it was me all along, always in the shadows. The author of all your pain, all your villains that you've ever faced, all answered to me. And it felt like it was just written to try and up Blofeld's importance, which, when you look at the franchise as a whole now, doesn't really make much sense with the other villains. And there wasn't enough material to just make Blofeld stand up on his own. I don't know why they had to tie everything in as close-knit as they did. And I guess I just have a problem with that. Craig says they are not really brothers. He was asked to treat him like a brother, which he hated. Yeah, they're not blood brothers, essentially. They're stepbrothers. Do you think that Bond wipes his balls on Blofeld's drum kit as well, like the movie, the Will Ferrell movie? That would be funny. Do they wear Chewbacca masks? But yeah, I get that they're not blood brothers, but essentially, for all intents and purposes, they fill that brotherly role with each other, don't they? Craig thinks, I think the next Bond film will be called On His Majesty's Secret Service. Oh, God, I hope they don't do that. I really hope they don't do that. I don't want any more shameless callbacks to that film. I like stuff in terms of the loose continuity, I guess, before the Daniel Craig era, which set up its own continuity as a soft reboot. But before that, I like the loose tie-ins to it. I like the nods to Tracy and the fact that Bond was married once. I love all of that stuff. But when you have, in No Time to Die, them shamelessly quoting and almost turning to the camera and winking to the audience, we have all the time in the world. And then that music playing, and then that music forming the crux of the whole emotional core of that film. I thought that was just really manipulative. And it was just, that song was on Her Majesty's Secret Service film. Don't use that music for this and try and... Because then it just comes down to nostalgia. You become emotional. I'm going to talk about this more next week, so I'm going to repeat myself next week. You feel more the emotion from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. When you hear that music, you're taken back to that, and you feel the emotions of that film. And the film wants you to take those emotions, those nostalgic, those feelings of sorrow that you have for that film, and extrapolate it and paste it onto this film. But there's no heavy lifting. There's no hard work done by No Time to Die on its own to make you feel those emotions on its own back. It's using lines and musical cues and stuff that you associate with a sad scene, for a tragic scene from a Bond film, and applying it to the new film. I just thought that was really, really lazy. Yeah, I know exactly what you were saying there about On His Majesty's due to the New King. Yeah, I get that, but I just don't want them to repurpose a title that already exists. I think that's just really lazy. I'd like them to come up with a new Bond name rather than just flipping one of the words in there. Continuing with the Blofeld stuff then, I just really don't feel like the character does much. And another example where the script just kind of waxes philosophically, and I think feels like it's a bit up its own arse, is where they go to Blofeld's lair. And if I'm going to split hairs as well, the design of the lair itself, it just feels very clinical. And I don't know what I was expecting. I don't know if I just want something that's, like a lightning bolt in like a giant castle somewhere like Dracula's castle, where it's obviously evil. But it's just really unimpressive to me. Just on a visual standpoint, I just don't think it's very interesting for Spectre in itself. I liked the low lit room when he's first introduced with a long table, and I really enjoyed that. But then when you get to his lair and it's this bright, garish, I don't even know what you'd call it. There's loads that, you've got the meteor in there, for example, and that's the scene that really pisses me off. That feels like a film student artsy wankery shit that I'm just not down. He's like, touch the meteor. This meteor crashed to Earth, an unstoppable object. Bond's like, oh yes, but it did stop, didn't it, when it landed here? It's the Dark Knight thing. This is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. And it's like, I get what you're trying to say. It's not that I don't understand it. I get the metaphor. I get what you're trying to do. But it just feels like it's really pompous and pretentious. And I hate that shit. And there was some of that in Skyfall, but there was loads of it in this film. It was all the way across it. I really hated that. So you have that scene, and then you have the surveillance thing. I need to talk about this, don't I? So there's the whole side quest in this film with the character of C, who has no redemption, who's such a two-dimensional character, played by Andrew Scott. Andrew Scott's a very good actor, but around this time, similar to Christoph Waltz, I think he was very much typecast as that villain role. Around this time, you had BBC Sherlock, which was massive, who played Moriarty. And Andrew Scott just basically plays C in exactly the same way as Moriarty to me in this film. The two characters are more or less interchangeable. And he's just so one-note. And they try and go with this surveillance thing, and surveillance is bad, and it's trying to be used for the greater good, but it's being used to the wrong ends. Again, like The Dark Knight, the whole Lucius Fox thing, and I thought that got kind of pompous and a bit preachy as well at the end with that, where Lucius Fox is like, oh, this technology is bad, and I'm... consider this my resignation and all of that stuff. They try and do it with this, and it feels like it's just in the film just to give M something to do and Moneypenny something to do, because without that, they'd barely be in the film and they wouldn't do anything. To me, I don't need M and I don't need Moneypenny all the way throughout the film. I don't need it to feel like an ensemble film. M and Moneypenny, and even Q to some extent, are just functional characters. They're there to get the plot moving. M's there to give Bond his mission. This is what you've got to do. This is the time frame that you've got to do it. Off you go. And there's probably like some, banter and bickering between the two of them. Moneypenny is there. There's that will they, won't they. It's a nice dynamic between the two, like a budding romance almost that never quite come to fruition. Bond just comes in, gives her a wink, gives her a cheeky one-liner. That's it. And then Q is there literally just to give him gadgets and send him on his merry way. And that's usually it. That's the formula. But for this, it just felt like, oh no, we've got to have it. We've got to up their importance. And we have this whole surveillance thing, and MI6 is a thing of the past. And that's not necessarily like a bad concept. In fact, that's a concept that's played up a lot in these Bond films, is that Bond himself is a dinosaur. The whole agents in the field thing is an aging thing, that it's going to be a thing of the past. I necessarily don't mind that as a backdrop to the film, but I just think C is a thoroughly unlikable character, and I just don't think he's well written, and he's just so one note. The whole film, he's just so one note. And every time it cuts away from Bond to this fucking side story, where the writing's terrible as well. Again, it's really preachy with Ralph Fiennes and Andrew Scott. It's just not interesting. It just eats up the runtime. You could just cut it out. Just cut it out. You just don't need it. It's just not interesting. And devote that screen time to more interesting Blofeld stuff or more Bond stuff, for God's sake. Keep the focus where it needs to be. And when it culminates in that whole, oh, hang on, Craig's taken off. Cracking video, Chris, but must go to sleep now. Speak to you next week for the most divisive film of the franchise. Indeed it is. Thank you so much for hearing me kind of hate on this film as well, when I know you really like it, but thank you for sharing your opinions. If you do manage to catch the rest of this video and you do want to comment on some of the stuff that I haven't talked about, or maybe share your opinions more in depth of what you really like about it, please do drop me a comment, dude, and I'll get back to it as soon as I can. But thank you for tuning in tonight. I really do appreciate it, dude. And yeah, I will see you next week for the grand finale. Oh God, what was I saying? Yeah, the side quest stuff. And then it ultimately culminates where there is a line that I thought was would actually be a really great line if you just remove the punchline to it. C says something like, well, we all know what M stands for, moron. and he goes to shoot M, and then M's taking the bullets out, and he goes, well, I guess now we all know what C stands for. And if you'd have cut the scene there, fucking brilliant, because we all know where our minds are going to with that. But then he ends it with careless. I thought, oh, no, you ruined a great joke there. Because I remember seeing it in the cinema for the first time, and everyone laughed at that when he says, we all know what C stands for. There was all like knowing laughs around the audience, and then, I don't know, it just felt like they ruined the joke with that. So if I was editing this film and I had to keep that stuff in, I'd get rid of that line. Because I really want M alluding to what I thought he was alluding to in the first place. And then there's this really goofy scene, like C falls off the thing, doesn't he? The tower, and he's like, whoa, 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 and he falls off, and he falls fucking far as well. Like, he is dead. He is dead on impact. He would be mush on the pavement. And then it cuts to Bond trying to rescue Madeline, and it cuts back, and there's a scene with Tanner, who's checking his pulse on the floor, and he just goes, dead. I'm like, fuck me. Like, Christ, like, well done, Captain Obvious. We would never have understood that. Dude fell stories, absolute stories. He is dead. Like, we don't need a pulse to confirm that. It's just pointless, and it eats into the runtime, and it just gives characters that really don't need anything to do something to do. And maybe that could work if it was more interesting, but I just don't think it's written well, and it's just very on the nose and very, very easily written. It's just, it doesn't feel intelligent. It just feels quite preachy. What else can I talk about this film? I guess some of the actions, set pieces are fine. Nothing's particularly stand out to me, though, and I don't know if that's just because I have a negative opinion on the rest of the film that it kind of brings everything down. I suppose, just objectively, the opening action scene is well shot and well done. You've got a all right car chase through Rome, I suppose, despite the comic relief that's thrown in there. You've got the plane sequence in the snow, but all of it, you have all of these impressive set pieces, but all of them just feel kind of deflated by the rest of the film. They don't really feel that memorable in the context of all of the Bond films put together. For example, and I don't know if this is still the case or if a film's outdone it now, but apparently there was one of the biggest explosions, or the biggest explosion, pyrotechnic, ever used in film history when Blofeld's lair blows up. Does anyone talk about it? No. Is it particularly engaging? No. And I think it's just because of that disconnect with the audience that there's nothing particularly memorable about this film. Everything's just kind of mundane. And even though you have the most impressive, the largest pyrotechnic in the history of cinema, at least up until this point, I don't actually know if it's been beaten since this one. People, will easily remember more explosions in films like the hospital scene from The Dark Knight, maybe Skynet exploding in Terminator 2. I love the smell of napalm in the morning, Apocalypse Now. Christ almighty, the pyrotechnics in that are fantastic. I'm much more inclined to remember scenes like that in films than I do, and then Blofeld's lair exploded in this film. There's loads of other random things that I don't like. The fact that Blofeld at the end has kind of he almost feels like the Riddler. He's left all of these red, painted arrows and pictures set up. It almost feels like a jigsaw trap from Saw or something like that, or the Riddler or something. It just doesn't fit with the character, and the character's just not really interesting. I know Bond's the man, and I know that Bond can get the job done, but Bond taking out a helicopter with a single pistol from a massive distance feels a little bit egregious, and I'm fine with, Bond always finding a way. But that just felt a little bit ridiculous to me. And the fact that Blofeld can hear all these gunshots going off and them pinging off the helicopter, and he doesn't bat an eyelid, but then one hits the helicopter in a certain way and it starts to set on fire and starts to go down. And then all of a sudden he just acts really shocked. Of course, we've got to give him the scar over his eye. They didn't have to do that. Blofeld is a master of disguise. Blofeld has had many appearances over the years, and it's only that's probably the most distinctive look, I would say, for Blofeld from You Only Live Twice, Donald Pleasance, with the, the dead eye and the scar, the Dr. Evil kind of thing. I don't even know what else. I've talked about the music. I've talked about pretty much all the main players in the film. I like Dave Bautista. I've mentioned that. I think he works well as a henchman, and it's nice to see a proper henchman in one of these Bond films. Yeah, I guess that'll do it for me. I'm trying to desperately think if there's anything else, but it's just kind of a miserable slog to get through for me, Spectre. And, I've tried to like it. I've watched it multiple times now, but I think I've just cemented that this, to me, is just a bad Bond film. I just really don't care for this one. The positives are very few and far between for me. I think in terms of casting, they've cast really, really good actors, but I just don't think the material's there. I don't think the chemistry's there. And I just don't think the story, I don't think they're doing enough with the potential that this film has. I just don't think it's doing enough with it. I think having Spectre back and having this organization back and Blofeld back, there are so many great things they could have done with it. But again, they go with that more stripped back approach, that they try and go with a more intimate storyline, which the whole brother thing in this one doesn't work for me as much as that smaller scale intimate story did with Skyfall. I just think that I think the success of Skyfall was kind of the downfall of this film. I think it kind of set them up with this impossible act to follow. And so they tried to double down and they tried to recreate all of the parameters of the success of Skyfall by bringing Mendes back and bringing the writers back. But that doesn't always necessarily guarantee success. Sometimes you just can't capture lightning in a bottle twice. And I think that Sam Mendes had one good Bond film in him. I think that was a clear vision, a clear passion project. And this was like a desperate... He didn't want to come back and direct another one. Like, he openly said that. And then he came back almost out of obligation. To me, it feels almost like Peter Jackson with the Hobbit films. He didn't want to direct them. He was done. His voice, his stamp on the Lord of the Rings, the Middle-earth franchise was done. And he kind of just came in at the last minute just because no one else was doing it. He thought, oh, I may as well do it. And it feels like with this one, maybe that story that he had for Skyfall was one that he had all along and it was always a clear idea of what he wanted. And this one kind of felt like picking up the pieces and coming up with it off the fly. I don't know. I feel like Sam Mendes was the wrong director for it. And I feel that kind of hamstrung the movie. I think that now that they had the rights back to Spectre, they should have just had a director that's just, yeah, let's just go classic Bond with it, even if it's more in the tone of Casino Royale, and let's just have some fun with it, and let's just really showcase these villains for what they are and have a really good Blofeld, engaging story with it. And I just don't think this had it. I think there's really weird scenes in there where Blofeld's got to torture Bond, before I kill you, Mr. Bond. And you've got that really weird torture device thing with the drill. And this thing's drilling into Bond's fucking head, into his brain. And Bond doesn't act any differently. There's no repercussions from it at all. It does none of the things that Blofeld says it would do. Like he said, it's basically going to lobotomize him or it's going to make him forget people. And it doesn't. And he's just absolutely fine, despite having this drill go straight through his skull into his brain. Pointless, ridiculous. Yeah, I guess I really don't like Spectre. But if you strip it to its core, it still kind of knows the sensibilities of a Bond film and kind of what's necessary and plays upon some of those tropes. You've got the White Cat, for example. Like, I think it kind of knows what it needs to be, but I think it's just done with a director that just wants to go with that really stripped back, realistic, miserable take. And I just don't think that that's the right trajectory for Bond. But at least this film didn't kill Bond at the end of it. So there is that. Anyway, that'll do it for my review on Spectre. I've actually think I've gone on a lot longer than I usually do on this one for the Bond film. So massive thank you to everyone that's tuned in, watched along, commented. And I hope you all join me next week for the finale, for the 60 years of Bond cap-off. It's the finale. No Time to Die. That's going to be 11:30 p.m. British Standard Time. Next Tuesday, that's going to be the 4th of October. And yeah, we'll put a pin in the Bond franchise. I've been talking about Bond now for almost 2 years straight, so it's going to be nice to take a break from it. But I have loved going back through it. Even the bad ones, it's nice to review them as a whole, In the meantime, if you're just discovering this stream and maybe you just tuned in, or maybe if you've had to tune out halfway through, let me know your thoughts on Spectre. Have I been too harsh on this film? Have you found more of an appreciation for it? Is this kind of like the Quantum of Solace effect, where over the years people have kind of softened to this film a bit more? Or do you still have exactly the same opinions on it as you always did? Anything Spectre related, Daniel Craig Bond era, or indeed James Bond overall, please do drop me a comment. And I encourage you to subscribe to the channel for more content, more movie reviews, television reviews, and live streams exactly like these ones. I love live streaming. I'm passionate about film and TV, and I'd love even more talking about them with you as well. So I'm over 100 subscribers now, which is great. So thank you to everyone that has already subscribed. And if you haven't, please do so. Hit the bell icon, all of that stuff, so you know when I'm going live. Or even just give me a follow on Twitter as well, at Hobbit Fan Editor. I post all of the live stream links there to tell you when I'm going live, and I'll post some random stuff as well that I'm watching throughout the week or whatever takes my fancy. So yeah, give me a follow on there as well. Why not? I will be back tomorrow for another live stream at 11 p.m. British Standard Time for more Star Wars content. So Star Wars Andor's on Disney Plus tomorrow up to episode 4. You can go and check out my review that I've already done on the first 3 episodes. Disney released all 3 episodes in one go. So if you go on my channel, you can find them on there. And yeah, I'm actually kind of interested to see where it's going, which is very unique for me with Star Wars as of recently, as of the last few years. So I don't know whether I'm quite on board with it, and I guess we'll see tomorrow with episode 4. So yeah, you can tune into that tomorrow at 11 p.m. and I'll be back at the end of the week as well on Friday for another Rings of Power review. We're up to episode 6 on that. We're almost done with it. 30th September, 11 p.m. British Standard Time. So yeah, that's content for the rest of the week. In terms of cinema visits, I'm going to be at the cinema Thursday night for Kill Bill Volume 1. I've never seen that on the big screen, so I can't wait to see that. I don't know if it's my favorite Tarantino film, but it's definitely the most nostalgic one to me. So I'm going to have an absolute blast watching Kill Bill Volume 1, which is my favorite of the 2, actually. But yeah, anyway, I hope you guys are all doing well. I hope you're all having a fantastic night, fantastic morning, afternoon, wherever it is you're coming at me in the world. Stay excellent, stay awesome, and I will catch you guys on the next live stream. Thanks, everyone.